Welcome, everybody, to Randomly Selected, powered by the Silver Room. My name is Mario. Thank you so much for being a part of our show. We really appreciate it, and thank you all for listening. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, call your sons, call your daughters. Subscribe. Today, we welcome in my friend, Dr. Tara Betts. And man, this is a good one. We talked to Tara about her origin story, and I asked her about who did she emulate when she was trying to find her writing voice. This is a good one. This is Dr. Tara Betts on Randomly Selected.
Well, I would say when you met me, I was just out of college. I was a fresh undergrad out of Loyola University. And really, I wanted to write for Vibe magazine. That was my first goal. I want to write for Vibe. And Scott Polson Bryan and Dream Hampton and Raquel Cepeda, those were the people who were like my heroes. But really on the low, I had been writing poems since I was a kid.
Yeah.
And, on the other hand, I would be thinking, dang, Sonia Sanchez, Gwendolyn Brooks.
Yeah.
I want to be in that tradition, right?
Yeah.
So I was kind of trying to balance these two different worlds and think, what if we could put them together? And I kind of fell into teaching. Mm-hmm. Did not expect to end up teaching. And I'm really glad that I did because it made me think about why is writing important? How do you teach this thing that you want to understand better and you want to love? So it ended up being, if you ask people today, they'll be like, she's a poet, she's a teacher, she's an editor. She cares about people. And on the low, I really want people to eventually be like, Tara Betts was part of the people who mentored a generation of writers of color who challenged colonialism, who challenged racism and all the other isms and phobias. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, I think the institutions that be are doing a lot to make writers think more about prizes and the money. And I'm like, no, what does it mean when you are really a free thinker and you challenge things and you create new spaces? And Chicago was really ripe for me to do that and think about that in some ways. It's a little tougher now, but yeah, I really love this city for that.
You're not originally from Chicago. You're probably from the Key.
I'm from Keys. Yeah, Killer Keys. That's right. What my brother would say.
That's right. Growing up in that part of the state of Illinois, because I don't have that same experience that I can share. Right. Tell me what that was like coming up.
Well, it's definitely not like people in Chicago who claim a high school.
Yeah, because that's our identifier. Where'd you go to high school at?
Where'd you go to high school at? Yeah. Our identifiers would be like, well, I feel like there's a little bit of touch where you still can touch the earth in Kankakee. I used to grow tomatoes on the side of my mother's house.
Right.
Because my grandparents had a garden. And it was one of those things, it's like I hated doing yard work, but when it was time to plant the tomatoes, I got excited.
Wow.
And we would just let them ripen on the kitchen window, so you see them change colors. Yeah. But I loved that part of my childhood. But on the same block, I remember the summer after my senior year in high school, I heard gunfire. So it was like all this stuff that people try to say happens in the city all the time and plagues the South Side. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's happening in the outer areas of Chicago too. In these places that people think are just mildly suburban, or they're like these little green hometowns where everybody's got a tree in their front yard. Right. So it was an interesting mix. And then you could definitely tell I went to Kankakee High School. And that was the public high school, so it was predominantly black. If your parents were trying to get you into college, they sent you to Bishop McNamara.
Oh, yes.
Which was the private Catholic high school, right? And I know my mom went there because I remember seeing her yearbook. But so there was that kind of divide. There wasn't a lot to do, but I was one of those kids. I loved reading. I always had a ton of friends around. And the way we grew up, my mom was a single mom. She bought a house, which I still think that's a miracle. I think about that all the time. I'm like, dang, she didn't have no money and 3 loud kids, and she bought a house on her own. And we had all these friends who had a lot less than us.
Right.
And She always made sure there was food in the house. Like, and we'd be like, me and my brothers didn't realize it till we were grown that there was all this food in the house, like more than we could eat. But we always had friends who would come over. They ate at our house.
She was always providing that sense of community then.
And security for a lot. Like, we had friends who moved in with us. And when I talked to other people from Kankakee who are like my generation or like Perry Shelton's generation, you remember him. Now he's Dr. Perry Shelton.
Dr. Perry, that's right.
But he's kind of a little bit further out like that too. And I find when you have these communities that are just outside the city, people kind of stick together more, or they used to take care of each other more. You can't so much do that now. Like, I've talked to folks now and they be like, dang, you can't do that in Chicago. I'm like, no, you can't.
When you were finding your writing voice, who were the people that you were associating or who you wanted to be or emulate?
Well, there's a few people. Like, when I first started going out to poetry readings here in Chicago, I thought a lot about not just Gwendolyn Brooks and Sonia Sanchez, but like Patricia Smith. I was very much into Pablo Neruda. I still teach Pablo Neruda. Most college professors don't teach Neruda.
Neruda is dope.
And I have
Slept
this,
on.
right?
Woefully.
You know, and most of the time I teach, the first thing I give them is the Book of Questions, which, if you've seen it, it's like a little book, and each poem is like about 4 to 6 questions. And there are these wonderful, weird things that he says, you know, like, is death an endless kitchen? And there's color and bread and birds, and he'll drop these political allusions because, you know, Neruda got exiled from his own country, even though it was the one place on the planet he loved more than anything else. Now, a Chicagoan can definitely relate to that.
Yeah, you would think. You would think.
You know, that you feel alienated from this place that you love better than any other place.
In this portion of the show, we talk to Tara about growing up literally in a bar in Kankakee and how much that experience influenced her writing. We talk about open mics back in the day, back in our day. And then we also ask her how hip-hop has shaped her career. Here's Tara.
Oh my gosh, my paternal or my black grandparents, they were the ones, they owned a bar in Kankakee, Illinois. The address was 589 North Harrison. So there's been times when I go home, I drop the address, like, I'm about it. North
watch
side.
Out. Kankakee, get off my back.
But to me, that was such a formative time, not just because it was the first 13 years of my life, but we lived in the apartment that my black grandparents lived in before, when they bought the building. And then the tavern was downstairs. And there's so many times, like, I'm just like, if anybody ever doubts my realness, like, they need to know that's the spot. Like, in some ways, it kind of reminded me of Lackawanna Blues. Like, where you had that collection of people that have been through all these random things, all these random changes. It was a lot of black working class folks, you know, people who worked at the local factories. Like, we had a Quaker Oats factory that was there for a long time. It closed down when I was in high school. And a lot of people who worked there would come in. And there were some people, you know, they did dirt. They'd be selling, you know, purses that fell off the truck, or there was, you know, people who were ladies of the night, like various people who were very loving to me and supported me in ways that people in the academy never did.
Yeah, say that.
And I'm never going to forget that, you know, and to be the grandchild of 2 black business owners and to see that in a way where, you know, they had money. My parents didn't really have money, but they had money. So it was kind of like they had a certain kind of status in the community. Like, the story was that my grandfather was the first black man to buy a Cadillac in Kankakee.
Wow.
So that was like a big deal, you know?
Yeah.
And when I think about that, I'm like, you know, I may not be an Egyptian queen, but hey,
that ain't bad.
That's my people's.
Yeah,
you know?
man. How much of that experience has influenced how you write?
I definitely think it influenced me wanting to tell stories that were accessible. I think some of my writing gets a little heady. I like to be bookish. I like to be cerebral about some things, but the accessibility is so important to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I want somebody who knows me since I was in high school to be able to read the book and say, yo, I was feeling that one thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and also, too, just thinking about, you know, how do we move forward and include everybody in the stories? Because I feel like there's a lot of poetry books that I read now. We're seeing this wonderful blossoming of writers of color across experiences, whether they're Afro-Latino or they're LGBT or, you know, just the range of experiences that I was craving when we were younger writers.
Oh, boy.
Like, I wanted to see that, but I
Yeah.
couldn't imagine it until I started to see it. That's been really powerful for me to think about, you know. And now I'm kind of wondering, I'm like, okay, how long is the wave going to last? Because
say that.
the Harlem Renaissance did fine until the patrons ran out, you know. And thankfully, we still have those works, right? That we have
Yeah.
all those pieces by Hurston and Hughes and Helene Johnson and, you know, Bruce Nugent, who was a queer writer that people don't talk about a lot, but he
great
helped
writer.
found fire.
Yeah, great
you know,
writer. Great writer.
yeah, tons of writers that, you know, I mean, they always talk about the key folks, but they don't talk about all the other people who were part of that circle and satellite.
Well, you can make that same claim about here.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
everybody mentions Dr. Brooks, and why wouldn't you? But there
Right.
were the Maria McRae's and the Kent Formans.
Exactly.
The David Hernandez, the Michael Wars. People who have so much substance in what they wrote or write. That really kind of set the foundation for a lot of us.
Absolutely.
And I say us loosely because I'm just kind of there. I'm Forrest Gumping this lifetime.
But-
I'm in the room.
But you know what?
You know what I mean?
Just for the listening audience,
Lord, here we
Mario
go.
was not always just in the room.
Here we go.
So when I was that young poet in undergrad,
Oh, boy.
I'm not gonna say anything to incriminate you.
Thank you. That's nice.
But I went to I started going to open mics when I was just right before I graduated. So the two that I went to, there was Malik Youssef did the Cotton Club.
Absolutely.
Down on
Shout out
12th in
Malik.
Michigan.
Yeah, man.
And he gave me my first feature.
I remember that.
But the other open mic I used to read at all the time was Lit X.
Yeah.
And it was still in the basement with the little pipes that were painted in the
Watch your
reggae
head.
colors.
That's right. Watch your head. All of it.
And then
Yeah.
there were incense sticks stuck in the wall. I remember
Yeah,
that. And you
yeah.
guys would start with libations and watering the plant. And we would
Yeah.
name the ancestors. You do that now. Kids are like, what are you doing?
What are you doing?
You know,
What the hell are you doing?
unless maybe, you know, you're in Phenom's workshop with a
Yeah.
lot of the young hip hop heads, which is beautiful to see that.
I know you are a hip hop head of the highest order.
Oh, dear.
You can oh dear all you want. I know you, and I've heard you get down, and I've heard you critique a lot of great pieces of hip hop music, of rap music, and critique the culture as well. How much of that experience in the 90s, and who's the 90s? How much of that experience?
Yeah, you
would
told on us now.
Yeah, I know. Oh, please. How much of that experience would you say? Again, the authenticity, people like Brother Mike. How much of that influences how you teach?
Oh, God, it's everything. When I first started teaching, I used to bring in hip hop songs into the classroom.
That's where I got it
And we
from.
would analyze
I got that
it.
from you.
You know, and
Yeah.
I remember talking with Dennis Kim one night. We were at Gill Complex, and I was like, yo, we need to break down the metrics of Rakim. And he was looking at me like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, dude, everything got a beat. Everything got a measure. So how do you break it? And, you know, people weren't talking about how to write bars yet.
Right.
But
But that's dope.
but in poetry, you do scansion, and that's essentially what it is. You writing bars.
Shout out to Dennis and Kane.
I know. I miss him
I
so
miss that brother
much.
too.
He's out being a dad in the Bay.
Yeah, he is, but he
But-
still got it though.
Yeah. Did you know that the I Was Born with Two Tongues album is on the internet? Like, you can just
Really?
listen to it.
Oh wow! I'd
'Cause
love
I
to listen
thought-
to that again. That was a great album.
It was a great album. Like, you can hear dated moments in it now, but it's still solid. It still stands up. And then to think about what that means for APIA poets.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's interesting you bring them up too, because I did the Dodge Poetry Festival back in 2010. It's a huge poetry festival in New Jersey, and poets from all over the country come. They have people who are stalwart fans, hundreds of people who come to hear poets. Mm-hmm. So you feel like you rocking a concert, you know. Mm-hmm. And when I did it, I did this one panel, and I was thinking a lot about. I watched this video with Dr. Bertice Berry this morning. I love her.
I haven't seen her in years.
She does these beautiful Facebook videos. She says, "Hi, my name is Dr. Bertice Berry.
That's my girl.
And I want to tell you a story." So she always tells you this beautiful story. But she was talking about how our job is to tell our stories, and the problem is other people are always impinging their story of who we are upon us. And I was like, that's it. And so I'm doing this panel at Dodge, and it's predominantly white audience. And all poets of color except for one. I think it was Michael Sorelli, who was the ED at Urban Word NYC at the time.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the communities we came out of. I said, I am very much dipped and dyed in the Black tradition. I read a lot of women poets across cultures, a lot of Latino poets across cultures, and that's who inspires my work. But in terms of the local community, I saw Latino poets, Asian poets, Native poets, crazy white bohemian poets, and we all read together, and they were like, that didn't happen. I'm like, yes, it did. And it happened in the most segregated city in America. So don't tell me it can't happen. Because people need each other. We found each other because nobody wanted to pay you if you were a poet, or there were no spaces, and the spaces kept moving. So if you have that kind of environment, you stick together. Like, I remember that's how Dennis Kim and Marlon Esquera found each other, and eventually they got together and formed I Was Born with Two Tongues with Emily Chang and Anita Yo Ali. Yeah. And the funny thing is that I remember them saying stuff like, people would meet Marlon and say, yo, there's this other Asian cat who be at Lit X. Mm-hmm. You need to meet him. And then people would see Dennis and be like, yo, have you heard of this cat named Marlon? He's been reading at such and such. Yeah. And that's how they got together. And to think about that, it's like, okay, Black people support other Black people, but usually if you're a marginalized person, we'll be like, all right, come in. The door is open.
I asked Dr. Betts about her position on whether or not poetry has taken the same turn as rap did, and how her current curations inform her with her current career path, and particularly the events that aren't expected from her. And we talk about teaching the youth now and what concepts she uses to relate to them. And how do your students that are now grown up, when they see you, how do they act? Here's more with Dr. Betts.
I think artists should be paid. Point blank. Yes. I just want to preface with that before I go into my jam. So I find that part of my thing was, even when we were young, I was like, would I do this thing if I was going to get paid or not? And I would have to say yes. It's the thing that centers me. It's the thing that I need to do. It does get hard though, because honestly, I've seen a lot of young people that I've mentored make all the money that I did not make. And I'm not mad at them. I'm very happy for them.
Yeah, same.
And I'm going to be like, I've told a couple of them, I said, when my time comes and I got some stuff that's ready to pass on, introduce me to your agent, because you know where you got game from.
Right.
So.
Right. Don't say it. Say it.
But I do find that part of why I think it's not just that young people are very savvy. They have tools that we didn't have access to. They had YouTube, they had social media, and they think about business in a very different kind of way. So I think there are things we can learn from them. So I say that, but also I'm like, I think our job as people who should be in an exchange with artists, regardless of their age, is to ask these questions like, what can I learn from you? But also, what do we need to interrogate? What do we need to criticize? What do we got to ask? Is this a good idea? Not that everything's a bad idea, but is it a good idea? Because I find that universities in particular, they like to hire people who they know they can undercut. And I walk into a room and I have a PhD. I've taught at the college level. I am not a full-time tenure track professor.
Right.
Every black man who has been a colleague or a peer of mine has a tenure track job. I don't think that's a coincidence. And I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I did not adhere to, I'm going to wear a blazer and slacks.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm ethnically ambiguous to some people, you know, where they say, okay, we know she's got some white in her, but we don't know what she is. You know, she might be Puerto Rican. She might be, you know, part Asian. She definitely got some black in her. So we don't know what, you know, and I mean, that's kind of plagued me my whole poetic career. Like, that people can, because you know how people would book shows, they'd be like, we need the Asian poet, we need the black poet, we need the queer poet. And if you didn't fit that identity politic, then what the hell? And more often than not, I find that you have to really mark out your space as a poet when you can fit in multiple slots. And I think that's always been my role. I remember, you know, the poet Emma Liza Hamilton,
Absolutely.
Abagunde.
Yes. Wow,
She said something to me about me being a shapeshifter once. And I said, oh, that's it. Because I can go, take me to the hip hop spot, take me to the spades game. I might not play because my cousin is my only true spades partner. But it's true. I don't play, like, I'll be like, nope. And he's in San Diego. I have not played spades since my cousin was. I'd be like, Eastside Wells out in San Diego. You are my only true spades partner, and it is on the record.
Yeah, now it is for sure. I know that you've expanded your poetic horizons to doing a little bit more. Is curating the right word? I can't stand that word, to be honest.
I don't like it either. I'm not doing museum exhibits.
Not yet.
Those are the real ones.
You ain't doing one yet. Hold on, you're randomly selected now. It's on.
Ooh,
Yes.
I like that idea. Y'all didn't see me do the Smithers fingers,
right? I know that you actually introduce a lot of artists or writers rather to people and the shows that you host and whatnot and the book talks and all that stuff that you do. Just saw you host recently with Ayana Contreras for her new book Energy Never Dies.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Yeah. Well, how can I not? Again, you know where I live. I don't show up. It's a trick to it. When you do those things that aren't the stuff that people would expect to see Dr. Tara Betts doing, how does that inform you about the directions you want to go in this part of your career? You're only 20-some years old, so you still got some room.
Oh, bless your heart.
Yeah, thank you.
For all of y'all who don't know, that's the Southern version of I am not 27.
Me neither.
But I think as far as starting to curate events, I mean, I did events back in the day. We did Women Out Loud and stuff like that. I really wanted to do the book events because, okay, you can get a bunch of people together. You can plan an event where you bring together musicians or artists or whatever. And I would love to do more of that. But my first love is books. If you go to my house, one of my former students who stayed with me for a while, Sierra Miller.
Yes.
So wonderful poet. She needs to put a book out too.
She's amazing. That's a writing woman.
And Sierra, she calls my house the library.
If you know, you know.
And
everybody calls it that, Tara. It's not just
really.
Yeah, we know where to go.
See, and then people don't come and see me though. That's the thing. I mean, pandemic, I know they can't, but you know,
we know where to go.
Yeah. So there's a lot of times I'll just pluck something off the shelf because I know I've been like, I may not read it right away, but I know when I need it, it's there. And I said, I think I've done all this other stuff. I don't want to host the open mic. That was the first thing I said when I was thinking of doing it. And I said, first off, there are a lot of people who are way more entertaining as a host. I don't crack jokes. I'm not.
But you're capable.
I can. But
yeah, you can.
It's got to be a natural thing. It can't be a scripted thing. I also don't want to, and I know I wouldn't handle hecklers well at this point because I'm gonna be like, saying something raw that is
they're
not
not ready for that.
That is not befitting of my personage in the public. So I was just like, and then you're tired. Like, to really host a good open mic, you know it's going to go more than 2 hours. You know you're probably going to have to hang out with people afterwards. And it's just a lot of energy you dedicate to making sure you have that space and it's consistent.
Yeah.
So I said, what can I do that's literary, but it's still fun for me? And I said, do book talks. You like talking to authors. You like seeing people talk. That was part of my education in Chicago too, because I didn't do an MFA until much, much later. Mm-hmm. Like, I was already teaching and publishing and everything. So I would go, and if it was somebody like, oh, Nikki Finney's reading at Women and Children First, I would get my little stack of Nikki Finney books,
right,
go up there and sit in the back or sit in one of the little chairs. And then I'd be like, will you sign my books? But I would listen during the Q&A and during the readings and take notes. Mm-hmm. Like, sometimes I'd do like, what was the playlist? What did they read during the reading? And be like, oh, I see. They put the banger in the front. Like, that poem that's going to be like, ooh. Then they'll do this because it kind of transition. You know, so I was thinking about how to sequence a reading.
You're thinking music.
Yeah. Or like, you know, a concept album sometimes.
Yeah.
I would think of poetry like that as well.
We're teaching these young people, well, not me so much anymore, but teaching these young folks now and watching what fuels them. Mm-hmm. Not the same stuff that got us going.
And that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Actually, I prefer it. I'm like, don't be a cutout of me. Do you, you know? And I think that's been one of the things that I really loved about that generation of young people that I taught here before I moved to New York for a while, is I really wanted to impress upon them. I'm like, look, these are the poets I like to read, and this is who I'm going to teach. But you need to find other voices. You need to find other stimuli and the things that motivate and work for you. Which is why, you know, I talk to kids who were post-punk or kids that were, you know, they grew up listening to salsa and rancheros. And then there's other kids who were like hip-hop heads like me. And I'm like, you're going to bring all these wonderful things to the pot.
Have you had the experience that I have had and a few other folks who have taught had, that your student that you used to teach when they were in like 6th or 7th grade has walked up to you on the street with a full family and like, hey, does that not just do something that changes your day?
It does. I know you can't get that as much in New York. Like, definitely, like when I've heard people go, Miss Tata, or I hear a kid go, Miss Betts, I'm like, you know, I will turn my head and look, even though they can't see me move my head. But yeah. So I think about that. But also, too, I've been in these circles where I'm starting to meet funders because, you know, I'm working on trying to get this nonprofit going. Or I'm going to these receptions where people are kind of, you're doing the fa-fa-fa, you know, where you get fancy. And I have to wear adult clothes. And
they don't know about the fa-fa-fa, Tara.
But then I'll go in, and then there'll be like 2 or 3 kids I taught there, and I'll be like, yo, what's up? You know? Yeah. And then they're like, how do you know them? I said, oh, they were in high school, and they did this poetry class that I taught. And then people were like, what?
Yeah, man.
Because they don't realize that I was working.
We were grinding back then.
We were working hard.
You were very much one of those people that I always admired. That taught, because I so much wanted to do it the way I used to see you or Avery or some of the other folks do it, because I was like, that's how you do it. And it would be an instant thing with you guys. It took me a minute.
I think, too, again, I think I learned a lot being in this little cadre of folks.
We were some weirdos, but
we were weirdos.
We were on it, though.
But that's what artists do. I feel like if you're a little bit strange, kids gravitate towards that. They don't gravitate towards the person all the time who's already successful, or who looks like their teacher, or who looks like their parents.
Yeah, true.
They're like, you're kind of quirky.
True. And I mean,
what are you? Do you play Xbox? You know?
Finally, we talked to Tara about her new projects, her new books, and all this other stuff that she's doing, and where her legacy is going with these new projects. And now, for our final segment, here's Dr. Tara Betts on Randomly Selected.
My legacy. I would say other than I have some really powerful students that I've mentored and still stay in conversation with, I hope that is a part of my legacy and that they go on to encourage that kind of critical engagement. But I'm also thinking, okay, I may not do a full length critical monograph that's, but I want to do all types of writing. Like, I still want to write essays that talk about our history and our literary heritage and, document some of the people that, that matter to me that I know some of these folks in the academy will never write about. I fantasize about all these different ideas that I have. And some of them I know they will never write about because they're very, I won't say they as a whole collective, but I think there are some people who are very invested in that idea of securing their place in the establishment. And I used to be very mad that I was not tenured because I know I have so much to give. And now I'm like, no, I could say what I want to say because y'all, you don't want me there, but I know what you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that makes your positionality very different. But I do think I want to keep writing books. I've thought about doing short films, maybe films.
I know about the podcast you want to do.
Yes. I have a couple podcast ideas.
You going to talk about it? The one that you and Nikki Patan want to do?
It's probably not going to happen. So I'm gonna hold that one down.
Sure.
It's probably, she's moving,
It does, you can do it.
Maybe.
You got to mention it now. The cat's out the bag.
Nah, because it's not going to happen yet.
I'll say it.
I may do one with my friend Aurelius Reigns because we've been brainstorming and outlining ideas for it already.
And also, his son is so dope. Third the Poet is just a bad boy.
And I remember when he was the baby
That's
bump.
what I mean. That's what I'm talking about. He walked up on me one day. He's like, my dad. I was like, who? He goes, Aurelius Reigns. I go, that's your dad. I was like, wait a minute. You are the...
He's the firstborn, and Zahi is the illustrator.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we'll probably do a podcast. We want to look at Black science fiction in our podcast together. Because he started publishing work in that genre. I'm writing some pieces. I have a couple of short sci-fi stories published. So I'm thinking, okay, I've always told my students, students get really freaked out about poems like, I don't know how to write a poem.
Oh, boy.
I can't make it rhyme. I don't know. They gave me all these rules. I said, how about you just write it? We figure out what genre to call it later.
Yeah.
And it would free them up. Yeah. And I still do it with adult writers, and I'm just like, that's because I do it myself.
Speaking of writing, as we get ready to head out into the world, can you read one of your pieces real quick for me?
Sure.
Because if not, I know what's going to happen to me.
What? What's going to happen?
Talk about what I'm not doing.
You're funny. Okay, I'm just looking. I'm sorry I have all this.
No. Take your time. We have one of the greatest producers in the world. We're good. Okay.
I've been thinking a lot about love lately, but I have all these science fiction poems. So I'm gonna read this. It's in this anthology called The Future of Black, and it's all poems about Black superheroes and Black people in the comics.
Nice.
So this is one of my favorites in the book. I have several. I'm really excited because I might do a book that's all Black comics.
Nice, you should.
But
yes.
So this is one of the poems in the book. Storm writes to Black Panther. T'Challa. Remember when we fought our way out of Hades together? This is what those who truly love spend a lifetime doing, and we escaped. We saved each other, and our embraces held everything from the continent that I missed. We were not mutants or Black or African, but distillation of spirits. You could invent anything, carry the legacy of generations born by your village, and fight the strongest of the pantheon, while some would have us occupy the smallest storylines. Forgetting has never been our option. We carry our powers and our histories, a color line of veils, a rucksack without acres. Tell me, that wasn't enough to call us future.
See what I mean? Talk to me about the boom.
The boom?
Yes. I'm sorry, the book.
I was like, what is the boom?
Maybe that's your new book.
You know, or maybe that's just what they think when I come in the room. Boom.
I know how you used to look at people after you would read a poem. Sometimes you used to look at them like, what?
What?
I remember.
That's that hip hop.
I know. That's what I'm saying. But talk to me about pre-sales for this book that you've got coming out.
Yeah, the pre-order link is up for my next book, Refuse to Disappear. I'm planning to do a release party in early July, so I don't know where yet, but it will be hopefully an outdoor venue.
Okay.
So we can keep safe during these precarious times. But I'm really excited. It's kind of a collected edition of poems that I've been writing for the past few years, and I'm hoping it'll make room so that I can work on this book about Alice Coltrane and you know, some other stuff that I kind of have percolating. But yeah, Refuse to Disappear is the jam, and it's on WordWorks Books. It'll probably be on SPD and Bookshop and eventually Amazon. I'm trying to give Amazon as little money as possible.
I no comment.
You know, I mean in terms of the book sales, because it's not great for publishers and authors.
No, it's not, because they don't really
saying.
get the money that they're supposed to get.
Yeah, they take a huge cut of the money.
It's kind of like Spotify for books.
Yes. That's the best summary.
It's kind of like Spotify for books.
You know.
You've often said to me, without saying it, I refuse to disappear. And we've often said that to each other about being in this game.
Right.
Which is why I don't really do poetry anymore. I'm more radio, although that's what I always wanted to do from the very beginning. Mm-hmm. I know that you have done so much cool stuff in the world. And the fact that you are refusing to disappear is unbelievably dope, and that book has got to be super poignant, and I'm so glad that you came and hung out with us today on Randomly Selected.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Tara, for being on our show today. We really appreciate it and you more than you will ever know. Thank you again a million times. The next Randomly Selected, what up, Pop? Dave Jeff will be on the show. Everybody have a great one. See you soon.